Silas sat on the porch, same as he always did when the sun began to bleed its last colors into the Harmony Creek sky. He was not a fixture, but he was certainly fixed. His wooden chair, worn smooth by 10 years of waiting, was molded to the shape of his worry, creaking a slow rhythm that matched the cicada's drum. Worried every day since her birth, had taken that simple word, tomorrow, and built his whole world around it. The porch was his post, the setting sun his clock, and the empty road his only hope. He remembered the exact way the dust motes danced in the last rays of sun that evening, the way they seemed to carry her young, hurried breath right out of town. He hadn't moved since. The dust of Harmony Creek knew Silas. It settled on his old boots, kissed the brim of his straw hat, and coated the faded denim of his overalls, but it never settled on his spirit. Folks said he was crazy, sitting there, always watching the road that ran straight as a needle's thread away from them all. Sheriff Ben, a kind man with tired eyes, would stop by every Tuesday, bringing a fresh glass of iced tea and a silent question. Ben never asked if Lily was coming. He just watched Silas watch the road. Silas always offered the same simple, unwavering answer before Ben could even open his mouth. "She's coming tomorrow, Ben, just running a little behind." Ben would nod slowly, drink his tea, and leave the old man to his faith. That promise, whispered 10 years ago by a 19-year-old girl, was the strongest foundation in all of Harmony Creek, stronger than the stones the courthouse was built on. It was Silas's lifeblood, and the town knew not to challenge it, for fear of seeing
Windows open to a shifting sky. Let the daylight pass, don't ask me why. The years we gathered waiting still.
She had packed one small canvas bag, a mistake he knew, because tomorrow would require more than one bag, and stood right on this very porch, the sun high enough to cast her shadow long and thin. "I need to breathe, Daddy," she'd said, and he hadn't understood. How could a girl need to breathe more than the fresh air that came off the river? He felt a tightness in his own chest then, a knot that hadn't loosened. He knew the fight wasn't about the town. It was about him, about the life he had built for her that wasn't enough. He had been too firm, too quiet, too much like the rooted oak that stood unmoving by the creek. Mrs. May, who lived across the street and possessed a curiosity that could peel paint off a wall, often tried to engage him. She'd stand at the edge of her yard, watering her petunias, and shout across the gap, "Silas, dear, did you hear about the new preacher? He says the rapture is coming tomorrow." She'd throw her head back and laugh, a dry, brittle sound. Silas never rose to the bait. He knew Mrs. May meant no harm, but her talk of tomorrow was always too flippant, too casual for the solemn weight the word held for him. His tomorrow was a specific, sacred event, a singular sun rising on a singular moment, not a promise tossed around like a cheap nickel. He would simply tip his hat, a gesture that required minimum movement, and return his gaze to the road. The town gossip was a low river flowing past the mountain of his waiting, unable to move the mountain itself. One sweltering July afternoon, the heat was so thick it felt like breathing soup, and Sheriff Ben had to plead with him. "Silas, it's near 105 degrees. You're gonna bake out here. Come inside for just an hour, sit in the parlor." Silas didn't even shift. He explained in the calm, measured tone of a man reciting the law, that if Lily drove up and saw his empty chair, even for a moment, she might believe he had stopped believing. "She's coming home for good, Ben. That's a mighty long drive. She'll be tired. She needs to see her daddy waiting, right where she left him. You understand the rule of the promise, don't you?" Ben did understand the rule. It was the rule of the South, the rule of family, the rule of unspoken guilt that bound a father to his fate. Ben knew moving Silas would be like pulling the cork from a bottle of 10 years' worth of sorrow. So he just brought a cooler full of water and sat beside him for a while, sharing the heavy silence. The true conflict wasn't the waiting. It was the conflict with the memory of the silver locket. Lily had worn it every day since he gave it to her on her 16th birthday. A cheap, tarnished thing with a picture of his late wife, Clara, inside. When she left, he hadn't seen it around her neck. He remembered asking her about it, his voice a low, rough rasp. "Where's your mama's locket, Lilybird?" She'd looked at the ground, kicked a loose stone with the toe of her boot, and mumbled something about forgetting it, leaving it on her dressing table. But later, Silas found the empty space in her room, and the locket wasn't there. It wasn't on the table or under the bed or tucked in the drawer. He knew, with the deep, cold certainty of a father whose heart is being pulled thin, that she had taken it, but she had been ashamed to wear it. That was the real measure of her departure, the unspoken truth that haunted his porch. There was a year, about 5 years in, when a young man with a guitar and a hopeful, hungry look in his eyes stopped by Harmony Creek. He looked like the kind of man who traveled light and carried stories. He saw Silas on the porch and, thinking he was waiting for a bus, sat down on the steps. He talked for hours about the cities Lily had gone to, about the fast lights and the quick money. He was talking about possibility, about the world moving too fast to look backward. Silas listened, not with his ears, but with that deep, intuitive part of his soul that knew the shape of a lie. The young man said that the promise of the winter brought its own kind of torture. The wind on the porch wasn't just cold. It was accusatory. It whipped Silas's thin coat around his knees and whispered that he was a fool for staying, that the road was now frozen solid and no car could pass through. The town tried to intervene. Reverend Harper came with a small delegation of church elders, their faces set with moral duty. They argued the sin of self-neglect, the sin of giving up on life when God had given him a house with a warm fireplace. Silas just pointed a rigid, cold finger at the empty rocker beside him. "This is Lily's chair. When she comes home tomorrow, she's going to be stiff from that long drive. She'll need a place to sit and tell me everything. This porch is the waiting room for that tomorrow, Reverend. And a man of God should understand the power of a promise kept." The Reverend's words froze in the winter air, and the elders left, defeated by the stubborn, scriptural strength of Silas's belief. One time, around year 7, a letter actually arrived. It had a strange postmark and Lily's looping, familiar handwriting on the envelope. Silas felt the paper tremble in his hand, a physical tremor that shook the decade of dust from his heart. He didn't open it immediately. He held it for a full evening, letting the anticipation become its own ceremony. He believed the letter was a sign, not of her return, but of the logistical details of her return. What time she'd arrive, what groceries she'd like. When he finally opened it, the pages were thick with apologies and explanations, none of which mattered to him. The only sentence he truly read, the one that broke the seal on his hope, was near the end. "I just can't come home right now, Daddy. But I promise, I will call you tomorrow." He took the letter, folded it precisely, and tucked it into the pocket of his overalls, replacing the physical presence of the daughter he knew with the constant weight of the promise she kept renewing. The secret that underpinned Silas's waiting, the subconscious thread that tied him to the porch, was not just Lily's promise, but his own silent lie. On the morning she left, they had argued about the old pear tree in the backyard. She wanted to cut it down. She said it was dead, brittle, and blocked the light from her window. He insisted it was only dormant, that it would bloom again next spring. He saw the tree as a symbol of their roots, and she saw it as an obstruction. He had been cruel that morning, shouting that if she left Harmony Creek, she would become just as barren and dead as the tree she wanted to destroy. He watched the hurt cloud her eyes, and that was the last expression he ever clearly saw on her face. Now, sitting on the porch, he knew the waiting was his penance. He waited for her to return and forgive him, but more importantly, he waited for her to prove him wrong about the pear tree, to prove that leaving had made her bloom, not die. Sheriff Ben found him one morning, slumped forward, his hat fallen to the ground. Silas was pale, burning up with fever, muttering incoherently about road maps and tire pressure. Ben knew this was his chance, the only time Silas's will was weak enough to move him. He called the doctor and together they gently lifted the old man. As they carried him through the front door, Silas opened his eyes, clear and frantic, and pointed a shaking hand back at the porch. "The chair, Ben. The chair. She mustn't see the chair empty." Ben promised him, "I'll put the chair inside, Silas. She won't know you left." But as soon as Silas was inside, Ben went back, positioned the chair exactly as it was, and sat in it himself. The town watched the scene unfold with hell. The period of recovery was hell for Silas, not because of the illness, but because of the physical distance from his post. He had always believed that the very act of being there was the magnetism that would pull Lily back, like a lighthouse guiding a lost ship. Inside the dark parlor, the hours stretched, slow and formless. He kept asking the time but only cared about one time. The sunset hour, the time when Lily was due to arrive. He realized, with a chilling clarity, that the chair on the porch wasn't just a symbol. It was a physical link, an extension of his own body. When he finally got back to the porch, weak and unsteady, he didn't just sit. He rerouted. He didn't thank Ben for sitting in his stead, because the promise demanded the original, not a replacement. The town, seeing Ben sit on the porch, felt a strange shift. For a day, they saw the promise not just as Silas's madness, but as a collective act of faith. It gave the story a new, shared layer. Children would point to Silas now, not with confusion, but with a kind of fearful reverence. The porch became a monument to loyalty, and the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun seemed to be carrying not just Lily's memory, but the accumulated hopes of the entire small town, a place where time ran slower and promises meant more than money. The silence around Silas was no longer pity. It was respect. Even Mrs. May just tended her petunias in silence, occasionally sweeping the walkway so the path to the porch was clear, just in case Lily arrived tomorrow. The most interesting conflict came from a small, insignificant thing: a calendar. A salesman, selling something or other, had left a brightly colored promotional calendar nailed right beside the porch railing, where Silas could see it easily. Every day, the salesman's smiling face was framed by a different date. Silas looked at the calendar with pure, undiluted hatred. The calendar was a linear, brutal instrument, mocking his circular, endless waiting. It screamed that a tomorrow had become a yesterday 10,000 times over. One afternoon, in a sudden burst of rage that startled even the nearby blue jays, Silas ripped the calendar down, tearing the paper into tiny, meaningless shreds. He needed the world to stop measuring his weight, to stop tallying the days, because his waiting wasn't about time. It was about the simple fact of the promise, a thing outside of human reckoning. Silas's subconscious was a deep, quiet pool, and one evening, just as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, a memory surfaced that he hadn't touched in years. He remembered Lily, about 7 years old, standing on the very edge of the porch, looking up at a dark, angry sky. A massive thunderstorm was rolling in, the kind that rips trees out of the ground. He had told her, "Don't you dare step off that porch, Lily. It's too dangerous. I promise, the storm will be gone tomorrow." She had obeyed, standing stiffly until the last drop fell, holding his word like a shield. He realized then that he hadn't just taught her to value a promise. He had taught her that tomorrow was a safe harbor, a place to wait for relief. And now, she was waiting for her own kind of relief, and perhaps, subconsciously, she believed her own return could only happen when the storm of her life was truly over, which was always tomorrow. One crisp October evening, a shiny, black sedan, the kind of car never seen in Harmony Creek, slowly rolled up the dusty road and stopped right in front of Silas's house. Silas straightened in his chair, his heart beating a frantic, joyous drum against his ribs. This was it. The end of the wait. The fulfillment of the promise. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, dressed in city clothes, and carried an expensive leather bag. She was perhaps the right age, had the right posture, But as she walked closer, the light caught her face, and Silas knew instantly that it wasn't Lily. It was the wrong shape of sorrow, the wrong shade of hope. It was not his daughter. The air went out of his lungs in a slow, defeated hiss. The woman introduced herself as Sarah, an old friend of Lily's from the city, and she came bearing a sad, final truth. Lily was fine, but she was deeply happy, married, and raising 2 children in California, a place Silas couldn't even point to on a map. She asked me to tell you, Silas, that she's not coming home tomorrow. She said she stopped saying that years ago. She's happy. She wanted you to know that she loves you, and she hopes you'll be happy too. Sarah's voice was gentle, but the words were wrecking balls hitting the frail structure of Silas's waiting. He didn't move. He simply tipped his hat, the gesture slow and agonizing. He did not accept the message, not the way she wanted him to. Silas looked at Sarah, the messenger of an unwanted reality, and said, "She's a good girl, my Lily, and she keeps her promises. If she said tomorrow, then that's what she means. You just don't know the depth of a promise made on this porch, child. The world out there, where you come from, it's all fast talk and quick lies. Our tomorrow is slow. It's true. Now, you tell her that her daddy's waiting right here. He's got her iced tea ready and her rocking chair dusted off. You tell her to drive safe." Sarah stood there, her expensive shoes covered in the dust of Harmony Creek, realizing that no rational argument could penetrate the fortress of his love and guilt. She left, her modern car vanishing in a small, symbolic cloud of dust, taking her unwelcome truth with her. Sheriff Ben found Silas the next day in a state of quiet, dangerous resolve. The black sedan had shaken the town, but Silas had shaken off the sedan. He was scrubbing the porch with a brush and soapy water, the 10 years of dust and grime yielding slowly to his effort. "Got to make it presentable, Ben," he explained, scrubbing a stubborn patch of spilled tea. "Lily's coming tomorrow. Can't have her thinking her daddy's let things go to rot." Ben saw that this wasn't cleaning. It was a desperate reassertion of control, a refusal to let the promise fade under the weight of external reality. Silas was purifying the altar of his hope. He was erasing the memory of the black car and preparing the space anew for the only truth that mattered. He started humming old hymns, songs his wife, Clara, used to sing while she rocked Lily to sleep. The rhythm was hypnotic, a repetitive, soothing chant against the fear that Sarah's words had planted. He imagined the sound of Lily's tires on the gravel road, a specific crunching sound he hadn't heard in years. He realized that the waiting had become a form of worship, a living prayer that defied logic and time. He didn't just believe she was coming. The act of believing was the coming. He was holding the door of the future open with the raw strength of his 10-year will. He felt a creative synergy between the heat of the sun, the creek's endless flow, and the promise, all working together to pull his daughter home. The next few days, Silas was unnaturally light. He spoke to Mrs. May, discussing the weather and the price of sugar. He even waved at the children passing by. It was the calm before the storm, the deep breath before the dive. He had accepted the risk of the promise. It wasn't about whether she would come, but whether he deserved her to come, and his decade of unwavering loyalty had finally settled that debate in his own heart. He was ready for the arrival, ready to face the music, whatever tune it played. The emotional tension was exquisite, a silent, high-pitched hum that only he could hear, a sound that said, "The reckoning is near." On the 19th evening, the wind shifted. Came not from the north, but from the southwest, the direction of the city. The sun, instead of being a bloody red, was a soft, pure gold, bathing the porch in a peaceful light. Silas, clean now from his scrubbing, sat perfectly still. He felt a deep, profound tiredness, the kind that comes not from labor, but from the completion of a very long, difficult task. He heard a sound that wasn't the cicadas or the distant train. It was the sound of a vehicle slowing down, a worn-out engine braking on the gravel. He didn't look up because looking up might break the spell. The vehicle stopped. It wasn't a shiny sedan, but an old, beat-up pickup truck, painted a faded blue. A girl got out of the driver's seat. She was thin, her clothes looked worn, and she carried the same small canvas bag Lily had carried 10 years ago. Her face was etched with a familiar weariness, but her eyes, when they finally settled on Silas, were Lily's eyes. She had come home, not triumphant and happy as Sarah had claimed, but tired and defeated, needing the porch more than the city. She had aged into her sorrow. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp of dust and years. "I'm sorry. I kept putting it off, always saying, 'Tomorrow.'" Silas finally lifted his head. He didn't smile and he didn't cry. He simply looked at her, then looked at the empty rocker beside him. Silas slowly, painfully, stood up from his chair. It was the first time he had fully risen without immediately sitting back down in 10 years. The porch creaked a final, long sigh of relief. He took the fresh glass of iced tea he'd prepared that morning, the ritual glass, and handed it to his daughter. "Sit down, Lily Bird," he said, his voice rusty but steady. "You look tired. You just made it. I knew you would. It's tomorrow now." He walked past her, down the porch steps, and stood for the first time in a decade on the actual ground of Harmony Creek. He looked at the pear tree, which was indeed dead, brittle, and gray. He finally picked up an old, rusty axe he'd left leaning against the house all those years ago. He had fulfilled the promise of the wait, and now he had a different kind of promise to keep.